5th, 2016. I call the meeting to order. We're here for the Committee of the Whole for continued discussion and review of the fiscal year 2017 budget. We are just on circlebacks now. Oh, yeah. See, I'm pulling up the agenda, Patty, while we're talking. Yeah, let's make sure we got enough people. Does that sound good, Patty?
That sounds perfect.
Clerk Spencer, I'd ask that you call the roll.
Deuter.
Here.
Sabatino.
Here.
Leader.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
Graham.
Here.
Polemski.
Here.
York.
Here.
Toledo.
Here.
Healy.
Here.
Levin.
Here.
Kennedy.
Here.
Heimquist absent. Wagner.
Here.
Mulliner.
Here.
13 present, 1 absent.
13 present, 1 absent. We have a quorum. We're in session. Any announcements? No announcements from the dais. We'll go on to public comments. Clerk Spencer, anyone signed up for public comment?
No one signed up for public comment.
Okay, no one signed up for public comment. Anybody in the audience who did not have an opportunity to sign up for public comment but wishes to address the council, please raise your hand.
We're trying to chime him into it.
That's a no. There's one person here who's happy to be here, and I think that's going to be satisfying enough. Okay, that's it for public comments. Business before the committee is continued review of the budget and hopefully conclusion tonight, which may bruise my rule of not going past 10 o'clock. I think it's going to beat the heck out of it, quite frankly. City Manager Grabowski, we're going to jump right into the circle backs. I'll remind council that we have a circle back list of 12. Last time we met, we knocked out 1, 3, 4, and 5. So we have 2 and then 6 on out. So I look forward to council conversation and discussion. Doesn't necessarily have to be on the circle back list to be part of the conversation, but that's going to be our good guide for this evening. City Manager Grabowski, you ready to start with circle back number 2?
Yes, thank you. At the meeting, Alderman Healy had asked about additional locations for additional LPR cameras. We have 3 installed, and as we have put in the memo, each is approximately $10,000 to purchase and install, and we have provided funding in the past from the asset forfeiture funds.
Okay, Alderman Healy, you put this circle back on there. Any additional comments or questions you have?
Just a couple, just one additional comment. While I think in the case of LRPs, more is better, I will defer to our police chief, who at this time feels 3 is sufficient until the police department has more time to work with them, use them, understand their true value. So I'm satisfied with staff response at this point.
Okay, any other comments before we move on? Alderman Bram.
Thank you. And thank you, Alderman Healy, for making this a circle back. I guess my understanding is a little bit different than what Alderman Healy just stated. I thought that we did do a trial period where we saw success with the trial period with license plate readers, and that we're moving forward with LPRs. With that said, because I believe, as I stated, the trial period is over, I'm actually in favor for moving forward this upcoming budget year with installing additional LPRs. I know that we have seen an increase in crime, I'll call it even pass-through crime. Traffic that's going through the city of Elmhurst and hitting our local banks, et cetera, businesses, homes. I think LPRs are a good tool, maybe not to prevent, but definitely to follow up and maybe catch the alleged perpetrator. I guess if I can ask the city manager and maybe the police chief as well, what is the thoughts and the results on the trial? I mean, I guess I'm making the assumption, or at least my understanding, that the trial went well. That's why we move forward with these additional installations. So why would we not want to move forward when there's a ton of areas that we can hit? You know, we have many expressways in large arterial roads that travel through Elmhurst.
Just to clarify, Mr. Bram, Alderman Bram, you wanted to know why we're not doing more, is that the question?
Well, I want to understand what the result or the perception of the result of the trial is. And I thought the trial was just 1 or 2 cameras, and therefore we did more than that, according to the memo here. So why wouldn't we continue going into fiscal year 2017?
City Manager Grabowski.
If I can just make one comment first, and I'll knock on wood before I say this, we're actually not seeing an increase in crime, thankfully, and Chief Ruth and his deputy chiefs are putting together a presentation for City Council to show that, understanding, though, that we have had some high profile, and probably with social media, you're seeing more reports about it. But nonetheless, this is a great tool for the police department, which is why we asked the council for the test period, which did prove very beneficial. We then brought it to the Public Affairs and Safety Committee. They gave the okay, they recommended the additional cameras, City Council approved them, and part of the discussion at the committee level was, we should think about increasing this. And what Chief Ruth and I collectively said was, we'd like to walk before we run. We want to put these up, we want to make sure that they're working well, that we have the ability to use the data that we're collecting and whatnot. And then we would bring it back to the committee, that was our commitment, we'd bring it back to the committee to look at expanding the project, or the program, assuming that it continues to be successful.
Alderman Bram.
So with that, I mean, and City Manager, you can maybe clarify for me, would be that my belief would be the city or the police would be coming back to the committee this upcoming fiscal year. And as I mentioned last time we talked about budget, if we're even considering a policy change, or in this case, a policy addition, why wouldn't we budget it in case we do move forward? I mean, just as I was writing up, because I actually wrote out a motion, I was just looking at my ward, and I mean, there's eastbound I-290 ramp, there's westbound I-290 ramp, York and Grand, York and County Line Road, and I can go on and on and on. So there's a lot of areas that we could move forward. So if that conversation is going to be had from city staff to committee in this fiscal year, why wouldn't we add the budget dollars for this fiscal budget?
I don't know that we anticipated coming back to the committee that immediate. I think we want to take a look at it and possibly put it into 2018 budget.
Alderman Palomsky.
Just for clarification, I was thinking that asset forfeiture funds are something that we don't budget for, that is something that the police department oversees based on what they come across. Is that correct?
You talk about
That is correct.
in terms of revenue?
Well, in terms of funding this line item.
Okay. City Manager Grabowski.
It is something that we do budget. It's just, it's like, it's a revenue source that has different requirements for being spent, but we do include those expenditures in our budget.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? All right, let's move on. Let's consider Circle Back 2 closed, or at least complete. Circle Back number 6. Trolley.
As we discussed this line item, there was some question about how the program would be enhanced, some opportunities. I know that Assistant Manager Kopp and Communications Director Schreff had talked about that. They put some information in the memo to City Council, and so we're here to answer any questions.
Alderman Healy.
So I thank you for the information, and I like the thought that staff has put into it about possibly extending it or expanding the program. I'm not advocating for any specific expansion per se, so whether it's a hotel loop or a second loop in town, I do think this is something that we want to look at for next year, and I would like to move that we adjust the trolley budget to reflect a second loop to be determined. Put an additional $45,000 into the budget for the trolley operation and an additional $15,000 into the marketing. have it go through committee to decide what would be the best route, at least the funds would be there. Again, I'm not saying we do it for the hotel, but let's put the funds there, and then through the committee process, decide how and if we want to expand. So I would like to make that motion.
City Manager Grabowski, where's the line item? I think it's on page 164. It has the trolley in it, I think.
1 second.
Maybe not.
That's correct. It's under 3098, other services.
Ah, there we go.
On page
3098.
164.
So just to clarify Alderman Healy's motion, 2017 line item 3098 is at 45. The motion is to increase it 60,000. So from 45 to 105, if my math is correct. Is that right?
45.
It's 60 plus 45 is 105, yes? Okay, Chairman York, back me up here.
You're spot on.
Okay.
It may be two line items, though. There's a marketing line item.
Is there a
and
marketing line item that's
actual
separate?
service line.
All right, so let's just make it easier. Add $60,000 to the, where staff feels is appropriate. Correct. To, in essence, budget for 2 loops plus the corresponding marketing, which is an increase on this page of $60,000. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, sir.
I need a second for the motion to increase the trolley line item by 60,000, second by Alderman York. Continued conversation. Alderman York, you made the second. Do you want to, you okay?
Yeah, I'll just make one comment really quick. I mean, I think to continue to look at the program and enhance the program, I think is a really good idea. So I'm 100% for the appropriation of the funds, and I have all faith in the committee that with city staff's guidance, you guys will make a good decision.
Alderman Palumski.
Thank you. I agree with the motion to add funds. However, I'd like to ask, and if I have to formally amend the motion, I will do that, but to make it broader. So it could be not just necessarily loops, it could be additional weekends, expanding the program generally. So I don't know if that is necessary, or we just discuss it at committee.
I don't think it's necessary.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's broad enough as is.
It's not specific to, has to do a second loop. It's
Potentially add a second loop.
Okay.
How about that? I'm going to make that call for the motioner and the seconder. Potentially add a second loop, look to enhance.
Correct.
Adding 60,000. Okay, Alderman Palumski. Anyone else? Alderman Wagner.
Alderman, or Mr. Mayor, thank you. I would just ask the committee, when it does get to the committee, I'm not sure I'll be able to make that committee meeting, but to report back to the, council, the ROI. We're getting into 6 figures now, and I think that'll become I'm all for it. I think you guys will be fine. I've always been all for it, but we're going from 15,000 to 105,000 in 2 years, and I just think that when you guys do report, put something in the report around the ROI on that. Thank you.
Great. Alderman Bram.
Thank you. When the trolley was first approved, it was talked about this is going to be the trial season. That was the first season. Then year 2 comes and goes, and then let's have another trial season having the same route. But the initial season was, well, after the trial season, then we'll see if we should expand the route. Now we're talking on season number 3, and we're not talking about expanding the route. We're talking about the potential of adding a second route. I don't think the motion is general enough. It is specifically stating to potentially add a second route. It's not saying potentially enhance the program. It is specifically saying add a second route. The trolley currently does not serve the north side of Elmhurst. I've made that statement from year 1 to year 2 and now going on year 3. If the motion deems to be modified, I will not make the motion to modify, but if it deems to be modified to be in general for enhancement, I will support this motion. But to say that this motion is potentially for adding a second route, I don't think we're doing our due diligence to serve the full city of Elmhurst. I know that there's definitely benefits of hitting some of the senior homes, bringing them in the downtown, because some of them don't drive. They will spend their money in downtown. But instead, we're talking about a specific second route here instead of making it a general motion, which it should be, especially going in the...
Alderman Bram, let me stop you there. I clarified with the motioner and the second that it was potentially to add a second route, but in general to enhance the trolley program. That's the motion before us. So,
Your verbiage is still saying potentially a second route.
yes, that is what it's saying.
So, the other question, or the other comment I guess I have is just in general. Last week, we talked about ALS, and we're talking about, some aldermen mentioned about putting the cart before the horse. We haven't talked about this in committee. How can we put it in the budget? Advanced life support, we said we can't put it in the budget because it's the cart before the horse, because we haven't talked about in committee. Now we're talking about a trolley, but the cart's not before the horse here. We're wanting to put it in the budget. I'm confused on how something is serious to the citizens of Elmhurst, that the cart's before the horse for advanced life support, but for a trolley, before it's discussed in committee, let's put it in the budget. I have a procedural issue of that in general because of the discussion of last week. But in regards to this instance, I think if it's in general, then it's fine to at least consider.
Any additional comments? Alderman Dunn, and I'll go to Alderman Toledo.
I had voiced my opinion in the past that it would be nice to have some type of service, maybe not, service for the north side, maybe not as extensive as what's running in the downtown and the York and Valletta area. I think, I agree with Alderman Wagner that this is becoming a substantial budget line item if we're up over $100,000. So I would like to see the committee really scrutinize the proposed enhancements and then discuss ROI on those. I would definitely agree with that. But I'm okay with the motion because it could be anywhere from stay the same to up to a second route. So that scale of potential expansion, I'm good with the scope of that.
Alderman Toledo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question for the staff. If this motion does not move forward, but this topic still goes to committee and is discussed, and the committee and council decide to expand the program in 2017 without these budget dollars being put in now, how would staff handle funding that proposal?
I think he said bake sale. He just made a loan.
Boy, I don't know that we have an answer for you this evening, because it's, it's a relatively substantial amount for this program. There's always, I guess, a little flexibility. I use that cautiously in something like this, when we want to make changes like that.
May I, Mayor?
Yep.
So last week, when we discussed the topic to expand budget and we declined it, the answer from staff was that there was enough wiggle room, and that was $75,000. What is different about this particular part of the budget versus that part of the budget?
Yeah. Tom reminded me that we did say that last time, and so it would be the same. It really would, but yeah, there's no difference from what we talked about last week to this week.
Thank you, and if I may just make a comment now?
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
So, in keeping with my comments from last week, I think that, again, we need to be prudent. We need to be thinking about how we don't just willy-nilly expand the budget just because. We heard last week that there was flexibility. Some of these things may move forward in 2017, some of the things may not. Where there's a will, there's a way. And we also heard from the chairman of the Finance Committee tonight that we typically, for the past couple of years since I've served, have 2 to 3% of our, less than we budgeted for the year. So there is wiggle room. If this is something that is deemed to move forward, then it sounds like we can handle it then. Thank you.
Alderman Levin.
I am not in favor of this motion. I feel that we budget by putting monies in, and they add up, and we levy to fund what we're budgeting. And I don't think it's a good budget process to talk about. I think we're going down a different road where we're starting to add things in, and don't worry about it. If we don't do it, the funds are there, but the budget has to be balanced. So if you add 45,000 here, 75,000 there, and then pretty soon you're budgeting for monies that you may or may not use. I think we ought to budget for what we plan on spending. I also understand there are contingency lines. Oh, there used to be, but there's some flexibility in the budget because you may not spend funds in one area, but I don't think that's the way to budget either. I mean, we're budgeting by looking through a fairly substantial document on all the programs we're planning on supporting, and I, for one, would like to budget for what we're going to spend. Now, if things come up along the way and we decide we want to do it, then we should put it into the budget. I'm not in favor of expanding the trolley program. I think it's been successful. I think it's been alluded to by some of the other aldermen that we've moved it along rather quickly. And I don't think we have to jump and push start this like it's the most important program. There are other important programs that aren't going quite as quickly. I'm comfortable and prefer to leave it where it is. Let the committee look at it, and if a year or so down the road, maybe not this summer, 2017, maybe 2018, then we do it. I just am not, I have, in my personal opinion, as a representative, I think there's other priorities I would spend the money on before expanding the budget on the trolley program.
Any additional comments from anyone who hasn't spoken? Alderman Healy.
Thank you, Mayor. So clearly there are two issues here, and Alderman Levin actually touched on both of them. The biggest issue, in my opinion, is do you think we should look at expanding the trolley? If you think we should, then clearly you should support the motion. If you don't think we should, as Alderman Levin stated he didn't, then don't support the motion. I understand that. This talk of budgeting, Alderman Levin and I will have a disagreement on this as well. This is exactly the time we should be doing things like this. It's being transparent to the community. It's saying, hey, we might spend money in 2017 on expanding the trolley program. We might. If we think we might, then we should budget for it. So putting it into the budget now is exactly, in my opinion, exactly the time to do this. Just like, and the reverse is true too, if we don't want to spend money on something, now is the time to take that money out. But to suggest that budget time is not, I disagree. Because if we think this is something we might do, then we should tell the residents, tell staff, put it in the budget, and allocate for it. Where are the funds from this going to come from? They're coming, I believe this comes out of visitor and tourism. And when the committee looks at it, we will look at if we have the money in the fund to pay for it. If we don't, then we won't expand it. So I would ask you to consider the merits of expanding the trolley when you take this vote. That's what this is about. If you're not in support of advancing the trolley or expanding it, whether it means another loop or weekends or direct to Alderman Bram's house, being facetious.
Thank you.
That's what your vote should be on, not budgetary and my opinion. Thank you.
Alderman Palomsky.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want a clarification from staff, and Alderman Healy hit on it. This is based on staff's recommendation, which would be an increase from 45 to 90 for the actual trolley program. It was my understanding that that would come from visitor and tourism dollars, hotel motel tax. But does that 10,000 increase to 25 also come from that same, or is that separate? Does that have a separate source?
That's also the V&T and hotel
Okay, so
motel.
also hotel motel, so, okay, thank you.
Additional comments? Alderman York.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I just wanted to just clarify one thing to kind of address maybe a comment that Alderman Levin made. As we talked about in the tax levy report too, this isn't a bad thing, it's just what it is. Our balance, our budget isn't balanced in the way that we have $10 of revenue and we have $10 of expenses. Our revenues this year are less than our expenses, and we are consciously making a decision as a group to spend down $3.6 million in this current budget. So just to make that clear to everybody. So we do have flexibility to, you know, change things as we go along, and it's not going to be wrecking the balance of the budget per se. With that being said, I totally agree with the cautious approach too, that anything that we add to the budget at this point in time will have the effect of drawing the balance down at even a greater rate than is currently budgeted. But I just wanted to clarify that for everybody, so everybody understood.
Alderman Levin.
Thank you, because that's a point I had forgotten, which makes my point, I think, even stronger, is that we're not levying for it, we're spending, it's like we're drawing out of the savings account to fund these programs. We're not, in a sense.
It's a surplus.
It's a surplus, I know, but as we spend it down, we're planning for the future of what programs we're going to have, and I think there's, you know, I'm not confident there won't be a tax increase next year. You know, I don't think we can keep going at the rate we're going. If we spend down this year, we can't spend down the next 2 years. I also just wanted to note that the total visitor and tourism budget has gone up significantly. It was, you know, ballpark 200,000. We're projecting already 320,000. So we've added significant programs there.
Alderman York.
So just, and Tom would probably have to help me out with this, but was it in 2000, in the early 2000s, that the hotel motel tax was started, and that's the funding mechanism for the visitors and tourism. So there's actually a requirement by city council to spend the hotel motel tax on these types of things. So just, some of it goes into the general fund. Is it 50%? I don't remember all the exact numbers, but when this hotel motel tax was instituted, its sole purpose was to fund things like this, like the community grant program and other such things that drive visitors and tourism. So it's not like it's truly a general fund activity. It's that money's earmarked for these types of purposes.
The other thing I would add, just for council's consideration, is call it wiggle room, but it's what you see. You see it a lot in public works projects, not to pick on Chairman Kennedy and his committee. But we'll budget something. Let's say we'll budget $1.5 million to tear up a street and put in some pipes or something like that. And that committee in Public Works has a bunch of those programs. They'll have a half a dozen, maybe even a dozen of those projects. And a lot of times you'll see coming out of committee, the project was budgeted at 1.5 and it came at 1.3. Very excited to hear that. But every once in a while you get a third or fourth project and it says, project was budgeted at 1.5, it's coming in due to concrete costs or labor costs or whatever, it's coming in at 1.7. And in the committee report, it'll even say, however, there's additional funding available because previous two projects came in under, or something of that. That's the wiggle room we're talking about when we talk wiggle room. It's just a fact of life. When you go out to contract whatever is in this budget, we're not going to get all 4,000 line items down to the penny. Typically in the past, it's been 0 to 3%. Nice conservative budget, and there's money to be found, if you will. But the other part that's available is the general fund, which Alderman York points out, we made a conscious choice to spend it down, but worst case scenario, let's just say hypothetically that pick your bucket you're pulling it out of, you're pulling it out of visitor and tourism, the committee could decide it's imperative that we add this, and if visitor and tourism dollars can't figure it out, then we can ask staff, how do we pay for it? I think it's, what I don't want to do is, for every motion tonight, I don't want to ask staff, how are you going to pay for it? I think that's something that the committee's going to have to consider. And I don't want to make it sound like wiggle room makes it sound like staff put a bunch of fudge into the budget. They didn't. But life will either allow for a positive balance in that fund or not a positive balance. So I just want to set the record straight. Back to the motion of adding $60,000 to enhance the trolley program, potentially, including potentially adding a route. That's the way I've got the motion. If anybody is unclear on what this motion is before us, motion to add $60,000 to enhance the trolley program, including potentially adding a route, is the motion before us. Back to it. Alderman Deuter.
Thank you, Mayor. I see the trolley as a luxury, an amenity. I think it has been a fun addition to our downtown and has been enjoyed by lots of folks, and it adds some vibrancy. I think all that is great, but I think to consider an expansion, you really have to be able to justify more than it's just adding some vibrancy or it's a nice amenity to offer. A couple other aldermen have talked about a return on investment analysis. I don't know how you'd evaluate really what we're getting back, but I would want to see that before we would contemplate an expansion. And I also agree with the comments that have been made about being very conservative and adding funds to the budget. So I think the trolley is lots of fun, but I don't support the amendment.
Okay, additional comments? Seeing none, I'm going to ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll on the motion to add $60,000 to enhance the trolley program, including potentially adding a route. Clerk
Boyer.
Spencer.
No.
Sabatino.
Yes.
Leader.
Aye.
Dunn.
Aye.
Graham.
No.
Polemski.
Aye.
York.
Aye.
Toledo.
No?
Healy.
Aye.
Levin.
No.
Kennedy.
Aye.
Unquist absent. Wagner.
Aye.
Mulliner.
No.
Okay, I have 8 ayes, 5 nays, and 1 absent.
8 ayes, 5 nays, motion carries. Would ask staff to add $60,000 to the trolley program and put it in the appropriate line items. That is agenda items, circle back 6. On to circle back 7. I'm sure this will be much quicker. Sorry, did I say that out loud?
Is this on?
Okay, agenda item 7 is Alderman Leader requested and made his intentions known about potentially adding $50,000 for the Legion. Alderman Leader,
Yes,
floor is yours.
I am changing my request, as you will hear, but I'm going to put my head on nevertheless. Okay. I move that we add a grant of up to $30,000 to the American Legion. The details would be subject to review and recommendation by the Public Affairs and Safety Committee. The final action subject to full Elmhurst City Council consideration. Let me begin by repeating what I have said before. Due to natural attrition, the end of the
Hold
military
on,
draft.
yeah, hold on a second. Norm, I'm going to let you jump into your, but let's carve a motion out of that.
Oh,
Because
okay,
you
yes.
kind of threw a motion in there.
Yeah, I
Before you-
move
let's-
that we add a grant of up to $30,000. That's my motion.
Is up to appropriate, or should it just be 30? And
30,000.
committee can figure out if it's less at the time. Is that okay?
That's right, Mayor.
Okay, so
I
a
move
motion
that
to
we-
add $30,000 to where?
Other services line item.
6032, right?
What page is that?
It's
64.
164.
98, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it was the city manager Grabowski. I think the 50,000 for the Legion from last year was in 6098, is that correct?
That is correct.
Right now, we're at 75. What's, just for my own sake, what's that 75 cover? Was that city center? So right now, there's 0 in there for the Legion. Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, so Alderman Leader, your motion is to add $30,000 to line item 6098 for consideration to give to the Legion.
American Legion, Elmhurst American Legion.
All right, let me further clarify.
Mr.
Motion
Mayor,
is that-
but Alderman Leader mentioned a grant, and that's the 6032 line item, unless he did not intend that.
Well, I think he mentioned it, but now we're clarifying it, and if he just makes a motion to add $30,000 to the budget, I think that's appropriate.
That's what I'm
without
doing,
qualifying it as a grant. So I'm going to say that the motion is to add $30,000 to line item 6098 for the intent of that money going to the American Legion. Okay, everyone clear on that motion? Yes? I asked for a second. Alderman Mulliner has seconded the motion to add $30,000 to line item 6098 with the intent to give that money to the Legion, appropriately so, et cetera, by committee. Okay, now, Alderman Leader, we have a motion and a second. The floor is yours if you have any additional comments.
I do.
Oh, okay.
I do. All right, now that we have that clarified, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. I will go back to my comments.
Not too long.
What I was saying, as I have said twice before, that due to natural attrition, the end of the draft in 1973, and the shrinking pool of younger veterans, the Legion's financial burden of aiding veterans in need is very challenging. And what we're trying to do for the American Legion is a restorative function. We want to provide them with the seed capital that will eventually increase the demand for their bar, their restaurant, and their banquet facilities, the profit side of the Legion, to the point where they become self-sufficient to perform their mission. Remember, it is these revenues that power the charitable side of the Legion. And if people do not patronize them in adequate numbers, the Legion will close its doors. And its unique charitable mission in Elmhurst will be ended. The Legion is using the profits and private charitable donations, pardon me, generated by the military ball and the Thanksgiving Day celebration for the lonely Navy trainees to upgrade its facilities so that they will rival any in Elmhurst. It will become a unique destination, and it will appeal to people from inside as well as outside the city of Elmhurst. This is not a handout, but an investment in the Legion and in Elmhurst. It will generate increased tax receipts for the city, as well as being a shining statement on the part of all the people in Elmhurst that we support our Elmhurst veterans. For the heart of the American Republic, representative government, and civilized order, all that we hold dear is due to the service and sacrifice of our veterans. I want to thank every member of the City Council, every one of you, for their wise and generous decision to support our American Legion this year, over the past year. Every member of the Elmhurst American Legion thanks you all, one and all. And the veterans in need who are recipients of the Legion's many programs, thank you. The many hundreds of students who have received tens of thousands of dollars in scholarships from the Legion over the last several decades, thank you. And lest we forget, never forget this one, the horrifying toll of 22 veterans suffering from PTSD, committing suicide every day in America, rather than suffering another agonizing hour of horrors and dark, unspeakable things crowding into them. Tonight, by your generous and humanitarian action, you can communicate your deepest concern. Succor and outreach to local victims is at the very heart and soul of the Legion's irreplaceable Elmhurst mission. Elmhurst is a generous place. City of Elmhurst, not to mention private citizens, has provided almost $1.8 million in grants to worthy causes over the last 11 years. And that is right and proper, as such grants are a responsibility that has become an integral part of every advanced and civilized society. Today, all members of the military swear a solemn oath of allegiance. I took that same exact oath nearly 6 decades ago. There we stood, perhaps 24 young men, our whole lives ahead of us, a road which seemed to stretch on endlessly. Each one of us sobered by the ceremony. Together, yet alone, glimpsed and gone, irrecoverable. Our presence written on the air of a mild winter day, like hovering ghosts of the past. There was one difference in the ceremony. Today, all members of our armed forces are volunteers. In 1957, most, but not all, of the young men gathered in that room were called up by the compulsory military draft. Though most accepted it in good spirit, were even eager to go, there were some who were going reluctantly. And for all of us there were apprehensions of the uncomfortable and unknown, yeah. Just prior to the oath being given, the officer in charge asked if we were prepared to take it. Your acceptance was signaled by taking one step forward and raising your right hand. One step forward. That step was more than symbolic. By doing so, you crossed a strange and separate equator. You are no longer a civilian with certain inalienable rights and privileges. You are a soldier, and paradoxically, you are now solemnly expected to defend, even to mutilation or death, those rights that you have just shed. The gulf between the civilian and the military is immeasurable. We were never to be the same again, for the military claims you with an iron hand for life. It seeps through some alchemist magic into your brain and soul. So tonight, I ask all of you to take that symbolic one step forward to support our Elmhurst veterans. For if supporting our veterans is not right, then nothing we do here is right. You cannot stop. There is no halting place at this point. We have now reached a stage in the journey where there can be no pause. We must go on. Thank you, Mayor.
Alderman Healy.
Thank you, Mayor. I think you all know where I stand on the issue, but what I want to talk to is the process. Going back to last year, I guess earlier this year, we did give the Legion $50,000. We, basically through my decision through committee, we did it through the community grant process, and it was Alderman Toledo who said it best. We may have put a square peg in a round hole. In hindsight, I agree with that. If the money makes it in the budget this year, we will again review the request. We will not do it through the community grant process. We will come up with, I've been saying it's a hybrid process that will accomplish several things. First, ask the Legion to account for the money that we gave them last year, something they've already started doing. Myself, City Manager Grabowski, we've already met with them several times to get an accounting of where that money went. So that'll be part of the process. Of course, finding out what they'd like to spend and any additional funds that they might get, we'd want to flesh that out. And then any documentation that would support that, we will review. Also, I know the motion is to put the grant in the visitor and tourism section, community grant. That may not be the right place for it. You know, that is something that grant program is something that we say, we want to bring people in. And while I personally believe the Legion does that, I understand that there's concern that may not be the best place for it. So part of the review process would in fact be where in the budget should it be. We can move the funds. We can decide not to spend visitor and tourism funds and just instead spend general fund funds. But we'll take a look at that too. As I've said all along to you all and to the Legion, we want to do a process that's fair to the residents of Elmhurst, but it's also fair to the Legion. And in hindsight, the process we undertook last year may not have done that. We did that because of questions I was getting from aldermen. How are they going to do it? What are they going to use it for? It was a new process. At that time, I felt that was the best way to do it. Now we'll take a look at different ways. So just from a procedural standpoint, if we choose to put the money in the budget tonight, the process that we will do through P&S will be as thorough, just on a different track, if you will.
Alderman Mulliner.
I think everybody in the room knows where I stand on this. I'm actually disappointed that we're not going for the full 50,000, but I understand some reasons why we're not doing that. I believe that this is one place where we can stand up and make a stand as it relates to where our priorities are. And my priority is to make sure that I support my veterans as much as I possibly can. Doesn't mean that if people vote against it, they don't support veterans, because I don't believe that. I believe that everybody has the right to do what they want to. But as you know, I wholeheartedly support this program, whether we call it a grant or whatever we want to call it, wherever we want to put it, however we want to handle it. I think we need to assist them any way we can to get them back on a firm footing. I just want to make people aware of a couple of things that I'm not sure if you're aware of. They have been moving forward on some significant cost-saving things that they've been doing. One of the things they've already done is they've changed all their lighting to brand-new lighting, which is going to save them about $5,000 a year on lighting costs. They're in the process of getting a grant from, I believe it's Home Depot, to help them to remodel and modernize some of the facilities that they have there, and Home Depot is going to assist them with that. So as we were saying before, as Alderman Leader and Alderman Healy were saying, they're trying to do their part, and we're just trying to make sure that they have that chance to move this forward. So I wholeheartedly support it, and I'm just going to say ditto to Alderman Leader, because I couldn't do that speech if I wanted to.
Any other comments? Alderman Bram.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I guess my first question would be, you know, per the memo that we received, it was $50,000 was being discussed or debated as a circle back, and now the request or the motion before us is $30,000. I would like some understanding, some clarification on where this dollar amount is, and Alderman Mulliner just made a statement that he understands on why it went from 50 to 30,000. I do not. I have not received or seen any documentation on why the request, until I heard Alderman Leader's motion, has been reduced by $20,000. The other question I want to put out there is Alderman Leader's well-articulated speech made the statement, I believe in the first couple of paragraphs, about due to dwindling younger veterans, and that's why there's a concern or an issue when it comes to revenue and sustaining the American Legion. That's a concern to me. That statement in itself is a concern to me, because if that is reality, and if that is part of the reason on why they continually need a grant or funding from the city of Elmhurst, then are we propping up the American Legion when it's not ever going to be sustainable? So those comments in itself raises a red flag to me. The other thing is that last year, my understanding was it was a request for a one-time, and now this is the second time. Alderman Mulliner made mention about they updated the lighting. We received a letter from the American Legion, or I'll speak for myself. I received a letter from the American Legion that stated that is one of the reasons why they needed the funding from the city of Elmhurst, was because they wanted to upgrade the lighting. So I'm getting a lot of misinformation from what's being stated here in the dais, as well as what has been sent here. I wholeheartedly support the American Legion. I wholeheartedly support the veterans. Ever since this issue has been brought to my attention, I have gone to eat lunch there as often as I possibly can to show my support of them. Maybe that's not really bringing down the revenue for them, but it is at least symbolizing that I do have their backs and I do want to assist them. But it seems like we're doing this ad hoc from a planning perspective. 50,000 one year, it was 50,000 documented in the memo for circlebacks, now it's 30,000. What are the dollars and what is sustainable here? I really need some of those answers before even moving forward with this. And I will also say what I said on the past item. We're putting, not my words, but previous discussions, we're putting the cart before the horse, but that's fine here, but not on other topics. So I'm concerned with how we go about policy-wise when we talk about budget in general. But the big thing is, where is the dollar amount coming from, since we just sliced $20,000 in a blink of an eye?
Okay, any other comments? Alderman Toledo, then I'll go to Alderman Mulliner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support our veterans. I support the Legion. I actually attended the military ball. I worked with Alderman Healy and other folks on helping them get a little organized at the beginning of last year. And I think it's a great program. However, and I may still support whatever comes out of committee. I would like to get more information, but staying the course last week and this week, I will not support the amendment to add the $30,000. It's 0.017% of our total expenses, and I'm pretty sure that we can find that if that moves forward in 2017. Thank you.
Alderman Levin.
I had a problem with the grant last year, and I still have a little bit of a problem this year. I believe that I don't know what it is. I've had some experience in another state, in California, where they have specific prohibitions, I believe, against using public funds for charitable purposes unless there's a specific public benefit. And these are Elmhurst taxpayers' dollars. I don't know how many of the people at the Legion are Elmhurst residents, so I have issues with it. I'm not sure why it's different than any other community grant. I think people could speak passionately about aid to children, homeless, all the way down the line. They're all good causes. I am pleased to see that the request, for whatever reason, went down from 50 to 30, because my concern was that it was going to be an annuity that once we put it in there, we would keep funding it. There was no answer really last year on that. And if the purpose is, I will say, I do think it's appropriate to support an institution like the Legion, which I think adds value. You know, we have other facilities in Elmhurst, you know, we have a symphony, we have an art museum, we have an American Legion. I think an institution like that adds value to our community, so I can support it for that reason. So I guess my question is this, because we keep, there seems to be a circle here, it's in the budget, so when it comes time to spend, you say, well, it was in the budget, we approved it, and then when it comes to budget time, we say, well, it's just a budget, it's a placeholder, it doesn't mean we're going to do it. So I want to clearly ask on the record tonight, if we put $30,000 in, is that saying we're giving $30,000 to the Legion? Is this our decision tonight, or are we putting it in the budget for later discussion? Because my understanding it was for later discussion, but now I'm hearing it more like it's going in and Public Affairs and Safety will decide how to spend it, and I need to know the answer to that.
I think anything that's in the budget is subject to review over a certain amount. So in this case, Alderman Healy, I think, clarified how it would be reviewed. I don't know if he went so far as to say that their committee would approve it, but I don't. We seem to have this conversation a lot during this time of year, whether or not it's in the budget, do we spend it, or it's a guideline. I think a budget's a roadmap, and I think that if a motion is made to add X amount to any line item and it passes this committee of the whole with a majority, I think that's a indication that there's at least support to look at that favorably, and that'll carry on to the committee. But doesn't mean the committee or the other council members, once they take a deeper dive, which we don't have the ability or time to do, literally the ability to do it during this process, once a deeper dive is done by the committee, who knows what's going to happen. But I think anecdotally, if you get a majority vote here, I think in general, the idea itself is a good idea, but it's not a commitment. So I didn't hear a commitment out of the Alderman Healy, but I give him an opportunity to clarify his
Well, follow-up, or, I'm sorry.
I think it was pretty clear to start. It's going to go through committee. We're going to review it a little bit differently than we did last year. A recommendation will come out of committee. It'll come before the council. It'll be the council's decision whether they spend the money at that point. If you want something in writing, we can put something in writing for you, Alderman, but I think I was fairly clear up front.
So I'm moving to amend to get it in right, oh, well, we'll skip that. No, because the community grant program doesn't come back here. That's why I'm asking.
It does.
It does?
Actually, it does, yeah.
Yeah.
Oops.
As a group, all right, all right.
Okay.
Careful, I might support your program, so.
Okay, continued conversation. Alderman Bram.
I guess I'll ask the question again. It was reduced from 50,000 to 30,000. If that information is known by some aldermen, I would like that to communicated to myself and the rest of the public on why we feel the dollar amount should be 30,000 and not 50,000.
Okay, Alderman Mulliner.
I'll do my best to address the issue there. The primary focus of the grant this year was used for the military ball and for the turkey Thanksgiving dinner for the recruits. And the big thing that happened this year, we're not sure if it's going to happen next year, but we do know that there was a significant reduction in the number of recruits that came in on Thanksgiving, so therefore there was no need to necessarily have the dollars to be that dollar amount. We're not sure if that's going to happen again this next year, but that's really a big chunk of it.
Follow up?
Yeah.
Thank you, Alderman Mulliner. My question then would be, my follow-up question would be, if the number of recruits was significantly less, then obviously there was surplus dollars that we provided this year, then wouldn't there be surplus dollars from this year where they wouldn't even need a grant altogether? I don't know.
Okay, any additional comments? Seeing none, I will ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll on the motion to add $30,000 to line item 6098 with the intent to provide that money to the Legion.
Goiter,
No?
Sabatino,
Aye.
Leader,
Aye.
Dunn,
Aye.
Graham,
Aye.
Palumski,
Aye.
York,
Aye.
Toledo,
No?
Healy,
Aye.
Levin,
Aye.
Kennedy,
Aye.
Lundquist absent, Wagner,
Aye.
Mulliner.
Aye.
11 ayes, 2 nays, 1 absent.
11 ayes, 2 nays, motion carries. On to agenda item 8, which in light of our council meeting and report passed might be a moot circle back, but I will throw it to Alderman Bram.
Agreed.
Agreed, okay, hey, we knocked out 2. On to agenda item 9, circle back. What is this one? This is Alderman Levin. A lot of information here, Alderman Levin. You requested this as a circle back. Do you have any additional questions or comments for staff?
No.
No. Okay, and knock off number 9 on the circle back. Number 10, consulting fees. Alderman Bram, I know you had some questions that were specifically answered. I printed it out so I can look at this. Alderman Bram, any additional comments or questions as it relates to the consulting fees?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My first question is, and thank you for the additional information in the memo. My questions have been of how the roles, and I don't want to use names here, but the roles, since I don't have, and that's would be my first question, what are the roles for each of these contractors or consultants? I definitely know the Bartel's role was, I believe the percentage was 75% museum, 25% economic development when initially hired. If you look at the spreadsheet that was attached, I don't know what it's, Exhibit B, consultant budget allocations, it's looking like the museum allocation for this role is relatively minimal, or the reverse of what it used to be, being 30%, and the rest being occupied by TIF, planning and zoning, and administration, whatever that is. I'd like to have an understanding on why we would need that additional role when, since this contractor position was allocated and the agreement was made, we've added an assistant city manager, we've added an economic development coordinator, so I'm not sure why we have Van Slyke Enterprises doing TIF functions as well as planning and zoning functions, no administration and no museum, but the Ken Bartel's role, it's 30% being utilized as, of that individual's time being utilized as museum, and 70% on functionality that should be covered by the staff we have today. And the intent of that role was never to have this individual spend time on planning, zoning, or this significant amount of time planning, zoning, and the TIF functionality. So I'd like to ask the city manager, have the roles changed over time and haven't been communicated? Or,
I'm sorry.
I guess the city treasurer buzzed me. But is that something that has changed over time, especially in light of adding those additional staffing position, full-time staffing positions, as I already mentioned?
City Manager, are you clear on the question, or do you need a clarification?
I believe I'm clear on the question.
Okay.
That's correct, that the roles have evolved over time. Since I've been here, we've had a couple different versions of makeup of the economic development team. And you're correct that bringing in the assistant city manager was a big part of that. At that time, we had a third consultant that we no longer use. And so that's where the economic development coordinator stepped in to do that role, along with a couple others, portions of that. You correctly stated that Mr. Van Slyke's time is mainly with TIF and planning and zoning, and mostly specific to real estate. I think that says that in point A. Point B, Mr. Bartel's services have varied back and forth. He does spend a considerable amount of time with the museum and also on the communications as far as the time travelers and our kind of town shows go, fundraising, and in addition to strategic planning for economic development, the Economic Development Commission in fostering them along in helping us to recruit new members. So that's primarily his role. But I think point D summarizes it well, that right now we believe this is a very effective and efficient means of providing the services that we are. I think as you look around town and you see the success that we're having, the number of new businesses that continue to move in, I think the structure that we have right now is proving very beneficial.
Alderman Brand, follow-up?
Yes, thank you. City Manager, you mentioned the previous consultant that we had. That previous consultant was part-time, and I believe when we initially had that, we didn't have the Assistant City Manager, which one of main duties is economic development. We didn't have the full-time staffed Economic Development Coordinator, which replaces significantly a part-time consultant position. I've heard that this position, this role has been beneficial. I don't know what administration means, because the Van Slyke Enterprises role does not include any hours or dollars for that. I'm not sure on this individual's participation in discussions of the various TIFs, when, as stated, we have 2 full-time and a contractor already discussing that at length. I'm concerned that we have dollars in the budget for a role that was created for 75% museum and 25% other duties. Now it is the reverse, and we have 2 full-time staff to take on that role. I haven't heard what the definition of these roles are. I've heard that these roles have changed over time, even though we've added full-time staff. I don't know what the objective or the goals of these positions are. The bullet item that was just mentioned on the memo, Part B, the majority of those items or examples is tied to the museum. Strategic planning for the History Museum. And then it does tag on strategic planning for economic development. I'm just looking for some type of justification to say, why do we need 2 contractors spending the majority of their time, including 2 full-time staff, on economic development?
City Manager?
I would say the Assistant City Manager does not spend 100% of his time on economic development. He also supervises IT, HR, communications, and building and zoning. So it's not 100% of his time that's spent there. And I would also say that since one of the reasons that we justified creating the position of Economic Development Coordinator is because of the increase in volume that we're seeing in inquiries and the amount of time that needs to be spent on that. That was one of the biggest reasons we made the change from the consultant to the full-time position. As far as Mr. Bartel's time, yes, it does vary from year to year, depending on what activities are going on. And I would say putting the economic development strategic planning at the end does not minimize the importance of it. It's a very significant part of the team as I said, in talking with the Economic Development Commission and all that they do.
Okay, any additional questions or comments? Alderman Braham?
I'm going to try it. So I'd like to make a motion to reduce the budget by $10,000. There are various line items. I don't know if you want me to read them all off, but it's essentially the line items under the Bartels role for administration and all the TIFs. It comes out to exactly $10,000.
You know, let's try that again, Alderman Braham. What, well, we're on page, I think it comes out of 107.
Yeah, I was looking at the consultant budget allocation attachment. That was
I
part.
got it, I got it. I'm just trying to, yeah, I think we'll probably, well, because this is spread out over a bunch of line items, is that correct, City Manager Grabowski?
That is
So, Alderman Braham, do you want to reduce, let me just break it down in its simplest terms. You want to reduce Ken Bartel's consulting line item only?
Correct.
Okay, so you want to reduce Ken Bartel's by 10,000 from
Correct.
to 40. Let me ask well, go ahead, you want to make the motion, and then I'm going to ask City Manager a question. So, all right, so the motion is to reduce Ken Bartel's spend from 50,000, or cap, I guess it's to change the cap is really what it is. So the motion is to cap Ken Bartel's spend at $40,000. Is that,
I mean, the
I'm
reason
trying
why
to figure
I'm,
out the best way to do this motion.
yeah, I mean, we can't change the agreement, right? I mean, the agreement says up to,
Yeah, but I think we can,
but we could change the budget line item, and that's what I'm looking to do.
yeah, but the problem is there's a half a dozen budget items, line items.
Agreed?
So just, I think the motion is to reduce Ken Bartel's consulting number from 50 to 40.
Yes.
That,
Multiple line items.
Your Honor,
yeah, anything to help with the motion.
Alderman Braham clearly said that he wanted it taken out of
Not in this
administration, TIF 1 and TIF 4, because those are line items that are there. I know we have line items that match those. I'm just saying,
Yes.
that's what he asked for.
All
They
right, so
equal the
I'm looking at the
$10,000.
schedule that we got attached. Administration,
TIF 1 and TIF 4.
TIF 1, TIF 4, TIF 5.
well, there's nothing in TIF 1, is there? Oh, there is.
Yeah, I see.
TIF 1, TIF 4, and 5. All right, so are you telling me that if I add up administration, TIF 1, TIF 4, and TIF 5, that's $10,000?
Yes.
What I'm telling you,
Yep,
Okay.
I second that motion.
it's getting late, my addition might be off, but I think that's accurate.
So the motion is to remove $10,000 from the proposed budget of the Ken Bartel's Consulting by removing the dollars from administration, TIF 1, TIF 4, and TIF 5, which is a total reduction of $10,000. I will entertain a second of that motion. Motion fails for not achieving a second.
Let's add, but not take away.
Alderman Braham, additional conversation or comments on number 10?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay. Circle back 10 is done. On to circle back 11. Alderman Kennedy. You want to give us a raise?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, first thing I have to inform the council is that due to state statute, we would not be able to give ourselves any modification in compensation because that would have to happen at least 180 days before the beginning of the terms of the officers whose compensation is to be fixed. So anything we do would have to be done for the budget of 2019. So there wouldn't be anything here from an official action, but this is something that I'm going to put forth a referral.
Okay.
And I think as members of the council, we know there are elected officials that spend around the same amount of time as we do on a weekly or bi-weekly basis that don't get paid anything or may get paid up to $60,000 a year in the case of some of the county positions in forest preserve and things like that. And so my suggestion is going to be that we tie our compensation to the rate of change of the federal minimum wage, and so that there's a system in place that, as that changes in the future, the compensation of this group would change accordingly, so that it's linked to something that's tangible. And if there's anyone who would like to contact me afterwards about being part of that, that's fine, because I need a second from a referral standpoint, but I just think it would make some sense to have a system in place by which the compensation has a basis. The last time it was changed was in 2001, and I believe prior to that had been sometime in the 80s. So 3 times in approximately 30 years, the compensation has changed. It's not a huge amount of money. It's not the end of the world. I think we should debate as to how we should create it and keep it going forward, so there's some logic behind it. Thank you.
Great. Okay, 120 days out is December 1st, as we all know, or 2nd? 180. So we missed that, so no reason to add it to this budget. It would be prior to the next election cycle, and look forward to your well-thought-out referral, Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, we're done with 11. On to 12. Dare I say the last item. Taxi subsidy, further discussion requested by Alderman Bram. I think based on conversation during the original review, there's been a change to the line item. Is that correct, City Manager Grabowski?
That is correct.
All right, so what page are we on here?
159.
I have no further questions due to the previous conversation and what was in the memo.
And I'm sorry, what was in the memo? He's fine, that's what he said. Okay, that's it for circle backs for this evening. That's it for circle backs that are listed on our circle back list for this evening. Before we ask staff to make all of the changes that we have given them and incorporate all our comments for a final vote 2 weeks from tonight, yes?
Correct.
Is there any other comments or any other additions or questions for our budget for this year? Where's my agenda? Is that it, Patty, on the agenda?
That's it.
Okay, do we have other business?
For adjournment.
I'll entertain, seeing no one else, and I'll concur with Clerk Spencer. She thinks it's time for an adjournment. Motion by Alderman Mulliner, second by Alderman Wagner. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.